Hi, this is Sue for Parkinson Me, My Journey with Parkinson's. Today I thought I'd talk to a topic that's probably dear to many of our hearts, and that is health funding versus ACC. ACC is the shortened form of the Accident Compensation Corporation, I think it is, but everybody just knows it as ACC. So if you have an accident in New Zealand, whether you're at work or at play, you're usually covered by ACC. So that can be from needing to have x-rays, needing to have physio, needing special equipment. For some people who have a significant accident or event that means that they end up with high needs, like in a wheelchair or something like that, those people can get often a lump sum payment. If not a lump sum payment, then perhaps they will get an ongoing payment if they had been working. So I think it's up to 80% of their income prior to the accident. And they can also get support services. So if they need somebody to help them shower and dress and do other things for them, to drive them around perhaps, sometimes if they qualify, they can get wheelchairs and motorised wheelchairs, adapted cars so that they can use hand controls instead of foot controls if necessary. If they need to put a wheelchair in the vehicle, then it might come with a wheelchair hoist. And sometimes people have had payouts to the extent that they've been able to purchase a home. So these things do change from time to time, so I'm not saying absolutely everything that I've mentioned gets covered with ACC, but that's an example of some of the things that I know have been paid to people in the past. Now, the thing that is difficult to stomach, even when I was a social worker, and most people that end up in a ward with significant injuries that end up making them need to have a wheelchair, most of them, I would say, would be a genuine accident and something that they certainly hadn't planned. But from time to time, you get people who have done, frankly, quite silly things like jumping off buildings or being towed behind a car while their friend sort of hoons around. I've heard of one person doing that. So there can be quite a few just really stupid things that people have done, and regardless of that, the person concerned can often get some assistance in the way of ongoing funding. One thing that is my husband's pet hate, and I must say I'm not terrifically keen on them, is the use of e-scooters. Now they are everywhere. There's probably 4, or there could be more companies here in Christchurch that have the e-scooters. And I think you download an app and then you hop on it and you just hoon around. They go quite fast. The thing is, it's supposed to be one person at a time, but often we see 2 people on a scooter, sometimes 2 people and a child, or 1 person and a child. And like I said, they're supposed to be for 1 person at a time. They're also supposed to be for people over the age of 18. And we have seen many, many people very much under that age who have been using scooters. So I know there are some statistics out there. My husband has read them out to me before, but I can't exactly say what they are. But there is some significant traffic through our emergency departments in New Zealand of people who have canned off these scooters. They have quite small wheels, and like I said, they go quite fast, and it's a recipe for disaster, particularly in a place like Christchurch. Despite it being many years since the first earthquake, I think it's about 15 years or so, you lose track when you're getting on with life here in Christchurch, I tell you. So anyway, especially in a place like Christchurch, I just can't understand the mentality of having these things in our city. Still, we have some really rough pavements, potholes, uneven ground that are just ripe for just grabbing the wheels of a scooter and chucking a person over the handlebars. So, and that happens quite a lot. So if somebody is riding a scooter in an area where there's lots of potholes and cans off, likely outcome is that they would end up getting ACC and being able to claim 80% of their wages if they were working. So this podcast is health funding versus ACC. Now, we talked about ACC paying 80% of a person's income if they have to stop work. The thing that I find challenging now personally for me is I cannot have the same opportunity. I gave up work last year. I've been retired now for just over a year on the 9th of May. And so I had to retire because of my health, because the job was stressful. The things I had to do, I would have had to be very much on the ball, quick thinking, and being able to problem solve quite quickly. And these things were starting to become problematic, and I didn't feel that I could remain, and I needed to tender my notice and to retire early. That being the case, the pension here is 65 years of age and I'm 64, so I have a year to go before I am eligible for any kind of government assistance. And the thing that I find challenging is that if I had done something silly, if I had hurt myself doing something with the same outcome that I couldn't work, I would get paid for that. Now, it has to be an accident for that to happen. So if you have a health condition like mine, or like any health condition that stops you from working, you can't get that kind of assistance. And I say, well, I didn't get Parkinson's on purpose. It was an accident. It was an accident of birth. The fact that both my parents had Parkinson's, they weren't to know that they were going to produce a child that one day when she was 59, because that was when I was diagnosed, that one day when she was 59, she too would have Parkinson's disease. So yeah, it was an accident. Nobody intended for me to get Parkinson's. An accident of birth. And unfortunately, that kind of accident doesn't qualify for anything in the way of financial assistance. And that's a damn shame, because when you go from having a reasonable income that you contribute to a household to no income that you contribute to a household apart from KiwiSaver, it feels a little unfair. It feels like I've paid my taxes, I've been a good citizen, I haven't done anything illegal, I've not been a bad person. I've tried my best to help people and support people through my social work and personally. And then when I need some help and support, there is nothing. So it just feels a little bit unfair. And I know when I used to work with people, when I was a social worker, you could guarantee if a person had a stroke, for instance, and they had been working and their wife or partner was working full time, that they would almost always not qualify for any kind of financial assistance. So it was a very difficult thing to do, to talk to people and say, I'm so sorry, it doesn't appear that you are eligible for any kind of support. It's a hard message to have to give somebody. And we had a campus at the hospital where there was a section where the people who had spinal injuries, were paralysed, were in wheelchairs, etc. They had a ward that specialised in that area on the same campus as the ward that we were working in. And so you would see people newly getting used to wheelchairs, supported by the spinal team, and they would maybe come across people from our area who had a stroke and as a consequence had to use a wheelchair. And as you do when you're sort of in that kind of environment, sometimes the two paths would cross. The people with the spinal injury from accident would meet by some way or another somebody from our ward who ended up in a wheelchair because of a stroke. And when they compared notes, I know a lot of our patients found it really difficult to find out that these people who had the same or very similar outcome, because they had an accident, they were able to get that support. And of course they'd say to us as social workers, why can't I get that sort of support? Why can't I get any funding? Why can't I get help with my mortgage, my kids' school, needing a vehicle, all those sorts of things? And yeah, it feels unfair. It feels unfair to me now that I'm in a circumstance, not that I need a wheelchair by any means at this point in time, but it does feel unfair for anyone like me, not just for myself personally, who hasn't had an accident, has paid taxes since they were, gosh, I would have been 15 for my first job, so that's a long time. 50 years, bloody hell. So I paid taxes for 50 years and I can't get any help until I turn 65 next year. So it feels a bit mean. But it would be interesting to hear from other people in other countries what sort of support you can get for something like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's or strokes or any of those sorts of things that affect the brain. It would be interesting to hear what's available. So anyway, that's my little hobby horse today. Health funding and the lack of for people like us versus ACC, where if you did something stupid, you would get the government giving you lots of goodies by comparison. So that's my rant for the day. Done and dusted. This has been Sue for Parkies and Me, my journey with Parkinson's. Kia kaha, be brave, be strong, be you.